Hi, I'm Kate Bailey. I'm a coach, an author, and a sober mama. And this is Love Sober, the podcast for the sober and sober curious.
You know who made it.
Hi and welcome back to Love Sober, the podcast for sober and sober curious. And today I'm really delighted to talk to Ellie Crowe. And Ellie is a certified senior This Naked Mind coach, a grey area drinking coach, and she also hosts the Present and Sober podcast with Sam Goldfinch. And I had the pleasure of talking to you the other week, didn't I? I came on to yours. So
you did, Kate. It was a wonderful conversation. So if anybody's missed that, they have to go back and listen to it. It was a really great conversation. And I was just messaging you this week to say the impact that's had already. We have a Facebook group with that's linked to the podcast, and the feedback we've had already on your episode has been phenomenal. So it's definitely one to listen to.
Oh, amazing. Thanks, Ellie. Well, it's lovely to see you. It's lovely to have you on, because we got talking afterwards, didn't we? And this is what led to this episode. We were like, right, we've got to get this in, because we ended up, as I tend to do these days, of just whatever I'm talking about inappropriately or appropriately, ending up then talking about menopause.
Yeah, me too.
to any old bugger that will listen. So anyway, we sort of had a kind of speed bonding, didn't we, after the kind of the formal kind of podcast. And we're like, yes, and what about this gel, and what about that gel? And we were like, okay, so menopause, International Menopause Day is coming up. We think it might be tomorrow, and we
with our perimenopausal brains
exactly have really no idea. But no, actually, when this podcast goes out, which should be tomorrow, it should be, if we are correct, International Menopause Day, and it is such a big thing. So we're going to dive into that today, our experiences of perimenopause, and for me, a bit into the menopausing journey, but all through the sober lens. And we're just going to start off chatting to Ellie about her journey, with that, and also her journey to being alcohol free. So hello again, Ellie. And so could you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming alcohol free?
Absolutely. So the place that always seems relevant to start is that I'd always considered myself just a massive social drinker. And it wasn't until after I had children that really changed. And as I think a lot of people can relate to, it became my only means of self-care. All of the other things fell by the wayside, and it was my means of relaxation at the end of the day. It was my means of escape, of checking out. And, I've got three they're young kids, and obviously they were younger when I was going through this a few years ago. And I was trying to run a business. We didn't have and don't have much social support. And so everything was falling to myself and my husband. And, you can only do so much, right? You're only physically one person, but we're trying to keep the wheels on everything, and it just was becoming impossible. So wine at the end of the day was just like the release valve. Mm-hmm. And what I didn't realize at the time was that something had changed in my relationship with alcohol, in that I was leaning on it in a way that I hadn't in the past. Oh God, I've just forgotten what I was going to say. There we go. There's a perimenopausal moment right there for us. Good grief. That was what I was going to say to you. Yeah. Thankfully, it's come back. Good grief. The other thing that I didn't realize at the time was that not only was it not relaxing me, but it was doing the exact opposite. And I'll come on to that a bit later. But this was completely unbeknownst to me at the time. So there I am, just trying to hold everything together. And when just to go back a little bit, my experience of going through those sort of child rearing years, when I had my first child, it was the first time I'd ever really taken a break from alcohol, that pregnancy. But it didn't bother me at all, because of course I'm not leaning on alcohol in that way yet. And I was so amazed at this, new life that was being brought into the world, that was where my focus was. When I got to the end of that pregnancy, I thought about drinking again. I then realized, oh, hang on, I'm now breastfeeding. And then I thought, well, how long do you breastfeed for? I hadn't considered that. So whilst I'd banked on taking a 9-month break from alcohol, I hadn't thought about what happens beyond. So that was a kind of an interesting time in my life where I was trying to figure out, like, I stayed away from alcohol for a long time, but then I felt like I was missing out on social occasions. And so I was trying to pump milk and store milk so that, the baby had milk for when I was drinking, and then I would have to pump whilst I was drinking to not get engorged. And so I got caught up in all of that. And it was so exhausting on top of having a new baby and figuring out how to be a mum. I just thought, like, why am I doing this? It's just, just exhausting and thinking about it all the time. And so shortly after, I fell pregnant with my son, and then got back into that, take a 9-month break. And all of the while, that kind of reassures you that you obviously don't have a problem because you can take 9 months off. So out of the other side of having my son, and I don't know whether this was the onset of perimenopausal stuff, whether it was postnatal stuff, whether it was boy hormonal stuff, I don't know, but something felt really, really different hormonally after having my son. And whilst I wasn't so far down the road in this leaning on alcohol, that's where it started to creep in, because I just felt so volatile. And I was having these moments. It wasn't all the time. It was typically once or twice a month I'd have these periods of like intense rage. And of course, alongside that comes a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, because, that's not the kind of person that I felt that I was. And I didn't want to be that kind of a parent that's, highly anxious and stressed out and tense and shouting and all of those things. So this sort of volatile mood, I was doing my best to cope with it whilst, I've got 2 kids under 2, no social support, all of that. And so wine, as I said, it started to creep in as this mechanism of self-care. And I got about a year postnatally, and I was on the floor. I just couldn't take it anymore. I went to see my GP, and she diagnosed me with something called PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And it's known as like an extreme form of PMT or PMS, but it can leave people feeling homicidal or suicidal, like it's a serious condition. And so that helped in that I understood that I wasn't making this up, like something had changed. This was something hormonal, but I didn't know really what to do about it. My doctor's advice was to go on antidepressants. And at the time, I was very much in this mindset of, if I take antidepressants, I've somehow failed. I had all of these layers of judgment on myself, like I should be able to cope. And so I left the doctor's office that day, and I battled on for probably about another month. And then I really was at a low. And I remember thinking, like, almost like, I don't care what happens to me now. I've just got to go and seek help. And my doctor was so helpful. I went back. I remember sitting in her office with the 2 kids playing at my feet. And I was just ready to surrender, antidepressants, whatever it is, I'll take it, because I can't deal with this anymore. And I remember looking at my 2 kids and just seeing these 2 little beings, thinking, and this is the worst of it, like thinking they'd be better off without me. They deserve better than me. And it's such a horrible, like, what a horrible, horrible place to be, because above anything, like, they need me more than anything else, but they need me to be well. So that conversation was a really interesting one, because she prescribed me antidepressants. She also advised me to go for cognitive behavioral therapy. And it was the first time that anybody asked me, she said, because she's prescribing the antidepressants, do you drink? And I said, oh, yes, I do. And she said, how much? And I was in such a daze at the time. I forgot to do that thing where you lie about it and you half it and not like, I told her how much I was drinking. Yeah. And she kind of looked at me like horrified, because I was probably drinking, I'd say, at least a bottle of wine a night, sometimes 2, just to be able to cope. And after it spilled out of my mouth and I saw her reaction, I had like this feeling of like, oh shit, yeah, that's not right, is it? And again, shame comes along with that, and guilt. And so she said to me, rather helpfully, she said, you need to cut down. I said, okay, thanks. So I left. And I remember thinking, yeah, she's right. I know she's right. But how? How do you do that then? Like when this is the only thing, like I honestly thought it was the thing that's keeping everything together. So the antidepressants were one of the best things, one of the best decisions I made, because what that allowed me to do was just get my head above water, felt like I could breathe, whilst I wasn't, like, it just evened me out. So that volatility that I mentioned I became much more even. Yeah. I didn't like necessarily how I felt, because I felt a little bit flat, I suppose. But at least I could function. That was meant I could function. I went to a cognitive behavioural therapist and worked with him on my anxiety. And within a couple of sessions, like, he was amazing. I really connected well with him, and that my whole outlook, my whole mindset changed within a couple of sessions, and it can be that powerful. So that was a wonderful thing. And I also reinvigorated my yoga practice, which is another big thing. And over the course of the following months, my intake, as far as alcohol consumption was concerned, it went down. It just naturally went down because I was going out to my yoga class. I wasn't feeling the extent of the anxiety and the stress that I had before. And
so you weren't self-medicating with that so much, and you were doing other things.
Yes. So it certainly shifted, but of course, you've laid these neural pathways down, right, where you're, like, I had this entrenched belief that alcohol relaxed me. I still very much believe that during this time. I also reset my gut. So I was kind of getting into changing what I was doing nutritionally. And at this point, I felt better than I had in a long time, came off the antidepressants. And then I fell pregnant with number 3. And so then you're back into that, abstaining for 9 months. And it was really interesting, because during that pregnancy, it was the only one of the 3 where I really missed drinking. I was looking longingly at everybody else, my friends that were drinking over the summer, and there I am, heavily pregnant and hot, and, feeling like I was deprived and missing out and all the rest of it. So when my last one came along, I often tell this story because it kind of epitomizes it. So my last 2 children were born at home. My youngest, she was born actually in this room where I am right now. And then it was the really early hours of the morning, and you have that, like, that initial, you're just full of adrenaline and all of that, and then you kind of have that, and I fell asleep for a few hours. Then I woke up, and I've got my new baby there. And I was laid in my bed upstairs, and my next door neighbour came round, and she walked into the room to say hello to me, new baby. And she giggled when she walked in the room. I thought, what on earth is she laughing at? And it was about 11 o'clock in the morning. But on the nightstand next to me, I had this chilled glass of my favourite white wine, because, like, there's me thinking, like, if I ever deserve a reward, it's right now. I've just laboured all through the bloody night. I've given birth again. Like, I deserve a drink. But at the time, like, that, it's funny, isn't it? Because, like, that hadn't crossed my mind. That was a strange thing to do. But because to me, alcohol was very much, it was a reward, it was relaxation. But, looking back on these moments, it's like, oh yes, okay, I can see things a little differently. So then I get back into, I've now got 3 very young kids, still no social supports, all of the same stuff going on. And the hormonal stuff, again, here, it was tricky because I breastfed for so long. I had the absence of cycles and what have you. So it was very difficult actually to know what was going on. All I could go on was how I felt. And what I started to feel was that resurgence of that monthly or bi-monthly volatility. And it wasn't as extreme as with my son. But of course, here I've now got tools because I've, worked through cognitive behavioral therapy, and I have my yoga and meditation practice. And so whether it was, again, this resurgence of PMDD, or whether it was perimenopausal, I'm now starting to err, and I think this was the beginning of being perimenopausal. But at the time, I would have been 38, so seemingly very young to even be thinking about it. So when I went to my GP, because this is about a year postnatally, I went to my GP again, and she said, look, I don't think you need antidepressants, but you might want to consider them for the luteal phase of your cycle. And for a lot of women that I work with now, this is what I'll often hear when they display perimenopausal symptoms. The GP will often offer antidepressants, either antidepressants or for the luteal phase of the cycle. And I don't know how I knew. I just knew that wasn't the right thing for me. And so I declined that. And we then got into this process of testing my bloods for my hormone levels and bits and pieces. But it was all very difficult to piece together because I was breastfeeding. And so they couldn't really read what was going on hormonally with that still in the mix. And I remember going to the gynecology clinic and them saying to me at the time, well, you're going to have to stop breastfeeding. But to me, that was it felt like a really selfish thing to do. Like, I'm going to stop breastfeeding my daughter to work out what's going on for me hormonally when she wants that nourishment. So it was a tricky place to be, but this coincided with me discovering This Naked Mind. So This Naked Mind, for those people that aren't aware of it, is it was originally a book and is now a whole company with many programs in its own right. But there's a lady behind it called Annie Grayson. So I just totally by accident, within my Facebook feed, I found this. It was like a little mini book called The 6 Vital Things That You Need to Know About Moderation According to Science. And this was written by Annie. And when I saw it, the two things that stood out to me were moderation, because that's what I was trying to do. And I was doing it badly. I would break all the rules that I set for myself. Oh, I'll only drink on weekends. And then the weekend would start on a Thursday and finish on a Tuesday. And I felt deprived when I wasn't drinking. So the moderation thing really piqued my interest. And the other thing that was interesting to me was the science angle. So I'm the kind of person, I like to know how things work, why they work, and then I'm sold. So I downloaded this PDF, and with trepidation, because I think subconsciously
knew your number
what
was
it meant.
Up, right?
Yes. But I started to read it and I was just blown away. So that belief that I had, drinking relaxes me, just in this, few pages of this little mini book, it showed me with science and facts I couldn't argue with, that not only did alcohol not relax me, but it did the opposite. It was elevating my levels of stress hormones in the body. It was exacerbating the stress and anxiety that I felt. And in that moment, it was the strangest feeling, because that belief that I carried around for over 20 years was, I could see it was false. And so my desire to drink just disappeared in that moment. Whereas the day before, if I hadn't have been drinking, I'd have felt miserable and deprived.
It's amazing, isn't it? The mindset shift. It's like a paradigm shift, isn't it? They call it when you
100%. Yeah. And it was this really weird feeling, because like I'm in this liminal space. I now don't want to drink because I understand it, but I've never considered living an alcohol-free life. Like who does that? Yeah. So then I had all these questions started to come up, like, well, how do you socialize without drinking? Do your friends want to socialize with you anymore? So it was this weird liminal space, but the overriding emotion was that of excitement and curiosity. I felt relieved that there was this other option that I hadn't even considered. And I liked the fact that it was a bit different, it was a bit subversive, and I just wanted to see where it would go. So I didn't tell my husband, I didn't make any big declarations. I just quietly stopped drinking and thought, I'll just figure this out as I go. Now, Annie being the marvellous marketeer that she is, I'm then on her email list. So a week later, I get an invitation to the live alcohol experiment that was taking place in January of 2020. And my initial reaction was, because it was $47, there was your investment for it. My initial reaction was, I can't spend $47 on myself. But again, that just shows like how little I valued myself at the time. And fortunately, as I've discovered, I was wrong about the belief about relaxation. It had opened up this willingness to be wrong about anything. So, okay, well, maybe I am worth investing $47. And actually, I'm going to save probably 450 quid by not drinking any booze in January. So I decided to invest, and it was the best decision that I ever made, because I'd invested. I made the decision I was going to show up to every live call. I was going to do every journaling exercise. I was going to watch every single video, because being the northerner that I am, I wanted to get my money's worth. Yeah. So I then embark on this wonderful experience with the live alcohol experiment. And because I'd already stopped drinking, I was heading to, I had my first alcohol-free Christmas, which was just unbelievable. You know, I learned so much in that time, but I also had the opportunity. There was an occasion with a friend of mine over the Christmas period where I chose to drink on that occasion, and it was mind-blowing because, of course, I had other beliefs about alcohol. I like the taste, I like the way it makes me feel, and this was the first time that I'd ever drank mindfully. And so what I realized was, oh, it doesn't quite taste the way that I thought it did. Oh, I don't like the feeling of being on a shit merry-go-round that I can't get off. So I then went into this alcohol experiment for the month, just really solid, knowing that I didn't want to drink anymore. And it was, I don't know, about two weeks into it. And the change in my life had been so vast that I wanted to be able to help other women, and particularly other mums. I knew there'd be so many mums just like me, just trying to cope, thinking it's the thing that's helping them, when actually it's the thing that's bloody well undermining them. And having gone only a couple of weeks alcohol free, and my anxiety had gone, I felt peace in my life for the first time. I was experiencing joy, like that childlike joy that I thought had long gone. I had mental clarity, and I just wanted to be able to bring that to other people, and didn't know how I was going to do it, but I just decided that that's it. I'm going to find out a way. And as if by magic, later that month, Annie then for the first time opened up her online coaching program with this Naked Mind Institute. And so I signed up for that. All the while, I've got this little voice that's saying, you know, who are you to be doing that? And you've only been alcohol free for a few weeks. Like, who the hell do you think that you are applying to be a coach? But there was a voice, like a very quiet voice, this stirring in me that just knew. I just knew. And so thankfully I followed that, and I went on to train with Annie. And then latterly I trained with Jolene Park as well during that year in 2020. And it was just the most wonderful experience, even if I hadn't have launched a coaching business off the back of it. To have the personal growth was fantastic. But of course, what's going on at the same time is all of the hormonal stuff. So the consultants at the gynecology clinic were really, really pleased that I wasn't drinking anymore. I was like their model patient. But what was becoming apparent was, and this is one of the things I just really want to get across to people, when you remove alcohol, when you get it out of the way, you've got half a chance of finding out what your baseline is. And whilst I was still breastfeeding, through the NHS, the medical route, they were really unwilling to do much with me. So I turned towards the naturopathic route, and I employed a naturopathic doctor, and I was using supplements to try and, like, I'd lost my cycle, like it. So I'd had an interruption with breastfeeding. My cycle had come back, but then it was very sporadic. And so the naturopathic doctor helped me get my cycle back, and I was working with her on low energy was one of my big symptoms, and headaches. And so I did that probably for about 6 months, and I had some success, but it was limited. And I remember going to see, I have an acupuncturist who's fabulous, and I remember going to see her, and she really encouraged me to think more about, like, I know you're young, but this, you know, the perimenopause is the 10 years before menopause. So could it be? And, you know, she was just because she'd been through it herself. I think she could see some of the things that were going on. And she said, look, you can dabble with hormones and you can come to me for acupuncture, but it's like, she likened it to like a dry riverbed that you need to get flowing with pockets of water. And she said, you know, you're having a little trickle down there, but what you need is like a vast torrent. And so if you need hormones, then, you know, you can use my Chinese herbs and all of these things, but they're not going to replace like for like. So if you're considering hormones, then you might want to consider them earlier. And so I then really pushed myself down that route, and I had to fight for it because of my age, although one of my doctors was very sympathetic, and she recognised particularly the risk to bone health as well as heart health and cognitive function. So she was really quite supportive, and I remember having this one call with it was actually a locum doctor, and I said, look, I'm not coming off this call until you've prescribed me some hormones, because like, let's say it doesn't work, I can always come off them, but right now it's my only hope.
Yeah.
And so that was my intro to getting estrogen and progesterone. But again, it's fortunate that I had the support of my acupuncturist, because she told me what to ask for. So she was telling me about bioidentical hormones. So the locum GP, who sounded like a young man, and he was all a bit baffled by the whole subject and didn't really know what to prescribe. So I remember Googling as I'm on, like, he's telling me what he could prescribe. I'm Googling it. And I said, no, that's got a synthetic progesterone in it. I don't want that one. I want the bioidentical. So this, anyway, the long story short is I got what I needed. And what was really surprising to me was literally within a couple of days, I felt so much relief, particularly from, I was having symptoms like the headaches were probably one of the worst symptoms, the brain fog, as I did earlier on, like forgetting what you're about to say, getting hot in the night, all of that business. So the estrogen and progesterone, like what a wonderful thing that is. When you take it at the end of the day and it helps you to sleep.
Yeah,
like
it chills you out.
Yeah. So
I was just going to say, just to kind of jump in there and just to reflect that, since we are talking about that sort of the hormonal piece, because I don't think I've ever really talked about it on the podcast. And for me, I think I went back to drinking in my early 40s after I'd been sober for a year, because that is when I think the hormonal shifts. I also, like you, got offered antidepressants. I also went to my male doctor, who told me I couldn't have HRT because I wasn't menopausal yet. And then I ended up going to a hormone clinic and getting a lot of education. So brilliant women's hormone clinic in Brighton, online during lockdown. And they gave me HRT, progesterone, estrogen, and I know that we're going to talk a bit about testosterone as well.
Yes.
And there is still so much misinformation about it, isn't
100%. I met a lady just last week, and her business, that they're ever so slightly older than me. So her business partner that she was referring to was 46. And as I understand it, the guidelines are here in the UK that if you're over 45, that you shouldn't have any fight for HRT. You should just be able to get it. So this lady has been to her GP and categorically been told, I will not prescribe you anything until you've not had a cycle for a year.
That's what I got told, and I was 48 at that point.
Yes, too bloody late. Too late. And one of the things that I learned is that the earlier, like if you want, and I recognize hormone therapy isn't going to be for everybody, but if you want it, if you're planning to have it, the earlier that you take it, the better, because you derive more benefit from it. And there's a wonderful book by Maisie Hill, Perimenopause Power. And I learned so much from that book. And she explains it beautifully in there. Both, she covers all sorts of subjects. It's a really well-rounded book. And she writes beautifully. It's funny and relatable. But in terms of like that, as I said, I like to know the how and the why. You'll get that from that book. And it was a real, like, it was very validating to read that what I was doing was the right thing against, lots of mention of the risks. We hear a lot about the risks of HRT. And
they've been disproven anyway.
Exactly.
It was faulty reason. I mean, I did, I found as a coach, so many women coming to me, I generally deal with the midlife. And I went on to train in it. I went to train with the menopause school. As a menopause doula, and I love, because there's also, I think there's almost that psycho-spiritual narrative out there as well, of like, okay, let's embrace this kind of change and reimagine the second half of life. Like I'm doing Sharon Blackie's Haggitude course, which is amazing. That's a personal, psycho-spiritual journey. But I'm like, but give me the fucking hormones as well. I'm not gonna, because the science is there. The science is there. the personal evidence is there as well. And I get really cross about women struggling and suffering, and especially it really impacts, again, if it's going to impact on your mental health and physical health, it's going to be a sober risk, right, as well, because
100%.
we're going to want to self-medicate that shit away, you know, in my experience.
Well, it's important, and the thing that people often don't realize is, and it's not just alcohol, but things like caffeine and gluten, like how it can exacerbate your perimenopausal symptoms as well. Yeah. So it's a really important thing to understand what's going on. And the things that were helpful to me, as obviously aside from removing alcohol, was educating myself and tracking my cycles and tracking how I felt. So it's not necessarily relevant the date, but the day in terms of day 1, day 2, day 3, that's really important. And I couldn't figure out any better way of doing it than a bloody spreadsheet. So, you know, imagine how interesting that is, filling that in on a daily basis.
You really like the science and the structure, don't you, Ellie?
But what was fascinating was once I'd mapped out my cycles and every single symptom that I was having, you could see these 2 peaks in the month. So I wasn't going mad. Like, what I was experiencing was very real. And it allowed me to have conversations like with my husband, you know, like I'm not just losing my shit all the time because I'm a bad person. Like, there's something going on for me. And
then you can plan, right? You can plan around it. It gives you power to go, well, actually, I'm going to work with my cycle, not against my cycle.
Exactly. Yeah. But you think about it, you know, you've worked, or I'm assuming people work. I mean, not everybody works, but you get to this point of your life where you've been working or volunteering or child rearing, whatever you're doing, and you've accumulated experience and wisdom, and you really start to, like, I've got to know myself really well in the last few years, particularly since removing alcohol. But to then not feel like yourself on a daily basis and not be able to function, not be able to perform at a meeting, or like the whole, like, forgetting what you're saying. I mean, it like that has really undermined my confidence at times. So I don't want anybody, a bit like I don't want anybody to suffer unnecessarily with alcohol. I don't want anybody to suffer unnecessarily without the therapy, the hormone therapy that they need, should they be open and willing to take it, because it can really transform how you feel in a very, very short space of time. This journey, like, your levels are going to change, but you can tweak it, right? So, you know, you might go from one size patch to a bigger patch, or you might take, you know, more gel, but, you know, knowing, like, tracking your symptoms and knowing how you feel, being able to tune into your body to understand how you're responding to this kind of treatment, as well as other things, as you say, to be able to, you know, whether it's to do with supplements or whether it's to do with meditation or other somatic practice, knowing how you feel, like that is so vastly helpful, because then you can adjust. And again, this is why, you know, I just know when you remove alcohol, you've got a much better chance of tuning into what's going on for you.
It's like you said, you've got half chance at knowing what your baseline is, and actually being able to read the intel externally and internally.
Exactly.
We can't hear anything when we're masking it all with alcohol. And so let's just talk about worry about, you know, the elevated breast cancer with HRT and stuff, and this, you know, we know that this has been discounted, but maybe we should unpick that for people a little bit that are listening in, you know. So what do you know about that study? Do you know, in your experience, what's that all about?
Well, again, I would point anybody to Maisie Hill's book, because she explains it beautifully in there, very succinctly and beautifully, very easy to understand. But my loose understanding of it is that it was just entirely a flawed study, and they had to, I believe, they had to stop it partway through. And what was being shown, like, I think, wasn't it post-menopausal women that were taking
really
hormone
late. It was
therapy.
late 60s.
Yes.
They started them late 60s, and they didn't do any control studies of any other lifestyle. So smoking, drinking, it was done on, I think, of quite an unhealthy section of the population, from what I can remember. I'd have to double check. But it was so flawed that even it got leaked to the press. And they had a big thing where they said, look, the experts were saying, if you leak this misinformation, this is going to devastate a lot of women are not going to get the help they need. And the press did it anyway, and it caused a massive shitstorm. And actually they've proved that transdermal estrogen, which was the worry, was the estrogen link.
Yes.
But transdermally, there is no elevated risk of breast cancer. And it also, what I didn't realize is that it isn't just about symptoms. It's not just about like, it'll be worth the payoff if I have a hot flush to put myself at risk. It's like, it's not about that. We're living longer. And if you have, we become hypoestrogenized, like we might have lower, too low insulin and need insulin, to inject insulin. So with that, and I think you mentioned before bone health. So some of the biggest killers of women being dementia, cardiovascular disease, and osteoporosis, it's proven that HRT is really important in risk prevention for some of the biggest killers of women.
Yeah.
So there's a hell of a lot of misinformation. So Maisie Hill's book, you said, is good. I would sign people to the menopause school. It's brilliant. Their courses are really, really cheap. It's all run by a doctor, so it's completely medically sound. I'm wondering what else is. You mentioned the kind of holistic stuff that you do.
Yes, yeah, and again, I think that's going to be very personal. Like I kind of found followed my own trail of breadcrumbs, and I'm blessed with a wonderful acupuncturist who's local to me. But just to start, like, keep banging on about Maisie's book, but just as a start to get you thinking about what you want to find out more about. Louise Newson, she has a clinic, and also I think it's called Balance. There's an app called Balance, has a plethora of information about all of these subjects. And Davina McCall did her documentary, or there's two parts to that now, and she was very clear about, I'm sure she said in that she was talking about this flawed study, and she was talking about what are the risk markers for breast cancer, and the two biggest are alcohol and obesity. It's nothing to do with HRT. So there's so much information, but finding to me, it's reminiscent of when I was pregnant with my first child, and I employed a lot of I went through remember the old, what are they called, NCT classes, those classes that you do, and thank God I signed up for those, because again, like, I had no idea. I had no idea what I was headed towards, and that really took me down this road of like informed choice. So just be informed. And I'd say the same about alcohol, actually. It's not about whether you drink or not. It's about how you feel and your intention, and you can't be clear without the information. So and one of the things that came up on the part 2 of Davina's documentary, and again Maisie Hill addresses it in her book, is that we lose 3 hormones as we traverse perimenopause, and then we become postmenopausal. So we lose estrogen, we lose progesterone, but we also lose testosterone. And this is why we were laughing after we recorded our podcast, because one of the things that has been really important for me is to get testosterone hormone therapy, because I was suffering really badly with not just with focus and drive and motivation, but like really, really low energy. And I've got young kids and all of that, but it was still like something wasn't right. And I had to, again, battle for this, particularly through the NHS route. I first of all went privately to get it, to prove my case and have my hormone levels checked. Went on to testosterone. That takes a little longer to work, but within about a month, I knew that it was working for me.
Yeah.
Because of my age and going through the menopause clinic here in Cambridge, and my consultant there wanted to satisfy himself, so bloods again, and then he would prescribe testosterone. And again, the bloods proved that I needed it, and we don't need the same as men, but we do need some. And so he prescribed me testosterone. So I'm a bit of a unique person because I've managed to get it on the NHS. And again, so many of my friends,
get mine private.
They need it, but they just can't get hold of it. But the unfortunate thing, and the reason why we were laughing about this, is that the preparation that I have, it's not a preparation that's designed for women. It's designed for men. And so, and I'll tell a story because it's funny. Years and years ago, when I was in my 20s, I had laser hair removal on my legs. So I took all of the hair off my legs so I didn't have to shave on the regular or wax or whatever. And since I've been applying because you got to apply this testosterone gel to your legs. And so it's a small amount of gel and put it on my thighs. And guess what? I've had this sprouting of hair back on my bloody legs. And so it just,
the joys.
Christ's sake, but the reality is, like, what I would love to see is more investment and care and attention put behind what women really need, so that we can have, because like this testosterone, I'm thankful to have it, but it's prepared for men. So the way that I'm taking it, I'm like taking it every other day. And I didn't have this hair growth with the other testosterone that I was taking privately, but it needs to get so much better for us. But in the meantime, I don't want anybody listening to this, I don't want you suffering unnecessarily, because there's so much available to us, but we just have to be able to know what it is and be able to, have the confidence to ask for it.
Yeah, and the big takeaways are so 100% concur, is that we can be going through this younger than we think. That we can take HRT if we're perimenopausal. You don't have to wait till you're, post 50 and you've got the sweats. It looks like all manner of things. For me, it showed up with, mood swings. That the real sort of, even though I was doing, it was like, how much yoga can I bloody do? And I was sober, and I know, and I'm journaling, and I'm like, you know what I mean? I'm listening to Tara Brach, I'm doing all the self-compassion. It's like, give me a freaking break. It's a hormone piece. And I still went to my GP and they prescribed antidepressants. Well, it did help, but I don't think it wasn't what I needed. So that kind of, you can be younger. You don't have to wait till you're when the doctor says to you you're not menopausal, that means that you've stopped your periods for a year. That's not even correct. It's like, that's not correct when you should be taking HRT.
No, well, particularly if you think about, you lose 20% of your bone density in those years leading up to menopause. So if you wait up until the point that you've hit menopause, then the damage to your bones is already done. And as you pointed out earlier, we're living longer. We weren't meant to live to the kind of ages that we are. So my view of this is, I'm going to be taking these hormones for life, because I'm going to need them to be able to live a full, have a healthy, as healthy as I can lifespan through these years where naturally I haven't got the natural hormones, so I'm going to need to replace them with, with the medical variety, so that I protect my bones, I protect my heart health, I protect my cognitive function. And again, in her book, Maisie talks about the importance of, from a cognitive perspective, again, if you're considering taking HRT, and estrogen, the earlier the better, because once there are brain cells that, once they're starved of estrogen, they don't regenerate, they don't come back. But if we can replace the estrogen earlier, then this is why it's then protective.
Protects against the loss.
Yes.
Yeah. And so much, there's the key threads. There's a couple of key threads through our chat today, I think. And one is obviously, the alcohol-free, and the menopause, perimenopause, into menopause. But the thing that really underlines it for me is this kind of need for information and how much misinformation there is about alcohol and women's health, and alcohol anyway, and mental health. Alcohol disrupts your endocrine system and will send your hormones even more loopy. And the other thing is the misinformation and the information that's needed around the perimenopause and the menopause and HRT. So, you know, it's so important, isn't it? Like you said, you know, the biggest takeaway for me from talking to you, apart from just your amazing, fabulous story and how articulate and generous you are, is that get informed, you know, make informed decisions. The science is there, and then advocate for your needs and get the help, you know. So important. And so I thank you so much. I mean, I really want to dive now into and now I want to talk all about my experience of going into the menopause, but that is for another will be for another episode.
Sorry, I've hogged it with the peri side of things.
No, but it's you're the guest. I shouldn't be. I should just be asking questions. I've actually chipped in more than I usually do. But just to know that if you are in that period, if you're going through that sort of, you know, you from late 30s into 40s, you know, even into your 50s, it's like, do reach out and get informed, get help, read some of the books, you know, that Ellie was talking about, or check out some of the courses. And I really believe, just to touch briefly on the menopause though, is that, like I said, I interviewed last year Alexandra Pope and Jani from the Red School. And again, it's that sort of psycho-spiritual, like they have approached it from like, okay, let's call bullshit and honor the female journey and carve this out as a proper rite of passage. However, I almost feel like there's a little bit of a kind of a divergence. It's like you've got to be one camp or the other. So it's like, if you're going to go all woman cave and psycho-spiritual about it, we're going all natural, and we're, you know, sewing our hair shirts. I don't know why I said that. That's my wish. I'm really sorry if anyone's listening and I've just completely sort of like insulted, you know, your approach. But that's how it feels to me. And also I'm doing Sharon Blackie's Haggitude, which is an amazing thing about reimagining and building out positive myths for aging for women. And that is another like social history being created as we claim the narrative and work with what we need. But what I'm quite passionate about is actually bringing that together. So it's like, look, we can, if we get what we need, if we advocate for our needs, we can actually celebrate this and live wisely and healthily with it, you know.
Absolutely.
It's not the time to be listening to just other people say, well, if you're going to be like this, you've got to do this. It's like, surely with sobriety and entering and being mums and being grown-ups and going through this period, it's like, this is the time to advocate for our needs, right? 100%. Cool bullshit.
Absolutely. You know, when you said at the beginning, it made me laugh, because like I talk to everybody about this now. It's like, because it just might sow that seed with somebody to think, oh, hang on, you know, stood in the school playground at pickup time and somebody's mentioning about their headaches or whatever. And I just, where it's appropriate, I just gently offer my experience, not to try and persuade anybody to do anything necessarily, but just to give them that seed, and then it's up to them what they do with it. But I know how valuable it was for me, for, you know, to have the little nudge here and there, and then to be able to go and find the resources and to inform myself. So don't be alone in any of this. And certainly
it's information and choice, isn't it? It's what you're saying. Yeah.
And these communities, particularly the kind of sober communities that we spend our time in, there's some wonderful conversations happening, you know, women that are, and men as well, but particularly in this space, women being very supportive and helpful of one another. So, you know, don't suffer through any of this on your own, because you don't need to.
Yeah, 100%. And it is that, like you said, it's almost like those taboos, like, you know, alcohol was a taboo that we couldn't talk about. Perimenopause, menopause, we mustn't talk about that. And thank goodness it is, you know, and thank you for sharing your story. So just before we go, what's your tip of the day and your reason to love sober today?
Oh, my tip of the day, it has to be going back to what I said earlier on about that belief that I had about alcohol relaxes me, and how dumbfounded I was when I discovered that it was wrong. Like, be willing to be wrong. Be willing to be wrong about everything that you know. That curiosity, that curious mind, it'll take you very, very fast. That'll be my tip of the day, is to have that beginner's mind. And what was the other question? Just remind me. My reason to love sober.
Yeah, your reason to love sober. Well done.
Man. Oh, God, there's so many. But just to be present to your life. Just to be present to your life. I spent so long living in anxiety, worrying about the future. And we can spend just as much time ruminating over the past. The only place we are right is where, we physically are right in this second. So removing alcohol, that really allowed me to become fully present to my life. And I'm so thankful for it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's made me feel so nice and sort of serene. Thank you, Ellie.
You're very welcome. Lovely. Thank you for having me.
So lovely to speak to you. So if you are, if you're concerned about your alcohol consumption and your relationship with alcohol, do reach out, get in touch. Soberistas, still has that anonymous Ask the Doctor service, which is a great resource for people. Just, check out Ellie's community. What's that again?
So the podcast is the Present and Sober podcast. So we're on all the main platforms. And if people are on Facebook and want to join the community, we have a free Facebook community. It's called the Present and Sober podcast. So there's a little group there that you're very, very welcome to come and join us in.